One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy kreuzen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brülosophy Podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. Hello, all of you wonderful brewers out there. You are listening to the 80th episode of the Brülosophy Podcast, which means it is Brü A time. Joining me to answer a slew of questions submitted by all of you wonderful listeners is my friend and fellow Brülosophy contributor, who is about as hungover as I am, Brian Hall. Dude, it feels like just yesterday we were up in Yakima recording the 6th version of our Brü A episode.
Wow, that seems like so long ago, but it also seems so close, and I already have Yakima on my calendar for this year. I'm so excited for it.
It's going to be fun. They just announced the Fresh Hop Party. I can't wait to be up there for that. We're still talking about potentially doing something with them, but these Brü A episodes are always fun. Of course, we could not do them without questions from our listeners. So, and we are okay with answering standard brewing questions. That's fine, but anything is fair game. If you have
anything at all,
and Brian has some weird stuff going on, so ask whatever you like. You can email your questions to marshall@brewlosophy.com or to feedback@brewlosophy.com. Just make sure to indicate in the subject line that it's for the Brü A, and we'll add it to the list. Everything gets added, but we only do these episodes every 10th show. So if we don't get to it in this one or the next one, we're gonna get to it at some point. So one question that I've been asked a few times over the last month is whether or not I will be attending the first annual Brewing Man event, which is being hosted by our great friends from Mecca Great Estate Malt on their family farm up in Madras, Oregon over Memorial Day weekend. Sadly, I will not be able to make it, which I'm super bummed about. We've got an annual whitewater rafting trip that we do every Memorial Day weekend, and I can't break away from the family for that. But it sounds like Mecca's got some really cool stuff planned: tours of a working malt house, presentations of various brewing topics, a food and beer pairing, all kinds of stuff. I'm hoping to be able to make it up there one day for this event. This is their first one, so go check it out. Mecca Great Estate Malt. You can Google it, or you can email them and ask them questions about it as well. We love Mecca Great. Just wanted to make sure any of you guys out there who haven't heard about it, now you know. So we're about a month away from the BYO boot camp in Asheville, North Carolina, and you've still got time to register. On top of the presentations you get to attend, including the one on experimentation in brewing that I'll be doing with Drew Beecham and Denny Kahn, BYO has some other fun stuff planned as well. Plus, Asheville is just a rad craft beer hotbed. It's going to be great. We'd absolutely love to see you there. Real quick, I just want to remind folks about the Brew Club, which is completely free to join and offers members all sorts of neat opportunities, such as having your very own experiment published on brewlosophy.com. Membership has been growing rapidly. They've got some really cool things going on. In fact, the focus of late has been on competitions. It's going to be fun to see how this crew fares in some upcoming comps. So you can learn more about becoming a member over at the Brew Club. That's the BRUclub.com. All right, massive cheers to the 800 plus current patrons of Brülosophy. Your support is a huge part of why we're able to do what we do, and we hope you all feel it's been worth it. For those patrons pledging at the $3 level, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of hop expert and all-around cool guy, Stan Hieronymus, who also happens to run the Appalachian Beer Blog, so make sure you check that out as well. He's going to be sitting down for an hour with patrons on March 16th, 2019. If you appreciate what we're doing and want to help us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron yourself. In addition to being able to participate in these live Q&A sessions, patrons receive other rewards, including access to unpublished Brülosophy recipes, unique discounts to Yakima Valley hops, and an invitation to a monthly video chat with the Brülosophy crew, among other things. You can learn more about becoming a patron at patreon.com/Brülosophy. And a huge thanks to everyone who has chosen to use the links found over at brewlosophy.com/support. When shopping online, it's a huge help as well. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, makers of the gorgeous turnkey BH15 pilot system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process, offering a plethora of complete stainless brewing systems as well as all the parts you need to build your own setup, Brewers Hardware is your one-stop shop for brewery gear. Go check out everything they have to offer at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention the Brülosophy Podcast at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Mark Sheridan from Bridgetown, Western Australia. Well, that's far away. He had some feedback on episode 76 where we talked about the progressively raised mash temperature experiment, this one where Matt mashed in at ambient temp, 68 degrees or so, and then ramped it up gradually. He says you hypothesize that enzymes may be working at the lower temperatures of your experimental low-temp overnight mash. I've also considered this, and in support of this theory, I'd suggest considering the malting process. To my limited knowledge, barley is moistened and germinated, presumably at a controlled, lowish, say 15 to 25 degrees Celsius, which is about 59 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit, temperatures before being killed. During the germinating stage of the malting process, enzymes actively convert starch to sugar within the grain. So if starch conversion enzymes are active in the malting process at low temperature, I would think it's not too much of a leap to suggest they're also doing the same in the mash at lower temps.
I'd say there's a certain possibility, although if I remember correctly, the malting process takes a little longer than our standard mash does. So I would think that you've got some enzyme activity. It's just happening much, 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 much slower.
I have no expertise when it comes to the malting process.
Like I said, I'm making a guess.
Yeah, so I just thought it was some interesting feedback about that. Potentially, I guess. The malting process is about converting endosperm and getting that starch in the middle of that grain, whereas the mashing process is about, allowing that starch to be converted into fermentable sugar. So I mean, that's a big difference between those two, but your guess is as good as mine, Mark. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com. You can leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320, or you can drop us some feedback on social media, and we may get to it there. So when I was in New Zealand with Gordon Strong a couple years ago, a style of beer we noticed lining the shelves of most beer stores was Pilsner. But it was different from what we're used to in that they were made with New Zealand hops. The beers were delicious and inspired the addition of New Zealand Pilsner to the BJCP guidelines. Well, a listener named Chris, I'm not really sure of his last name or where he lives. He didn't put it on his the sheet that he included with his beers. He recently sent me a version of this unique style for review.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Look how clear it is. It's not bad.
No, I like it.
Kind of tastes like wine.
Oh, you're a...
It's very clean.
I almost smelled something just then.
Excuse me.
Oh, I like it a lot. You know what it is?
Pine.
We like beers that don't have a ton of taste.
Apparently, if I drink Coors Light.
Coors Light. Man, I can't nail down it's like you start to drink it, it's like I'm going to give you this flavor, and then it goes away. It's gone. It's gone. It's gone. And it's gone. It's like I'm going to be a complex malt with a little bit. And it's gone.
Done.
Flavor's gone. Dude, I don't know. I don't know much, but I know how I like it. I like it, dude. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
There's almost like I'm going to sound like a fool. There's almost like a pepperminty flavor in there somewhere.
Yeah. I said pine, but
pine and peppermint. Those two go together, obviously.
It's not juniper.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I don't have a clue what it is.
I have no idea.
But it is good.
It's not bad.
I wouldn't have to fake like I like this. I actually like this. I give it 6.9 jerseys.
I'm going to go with a 4.
Of course. For a total of 30. Solid finish.
It was a very tasty beer. I picked up a really pleasant fruity pebbles aroma that kind of reminded me of a beer I once made with Kohatu hops. Now, here's the thing. When we do these reviews and I'm serving the beers to Jersey and Tim, I try to be as blind as possible. I'll grab the beers. They usually have some sort of informational, note card or something strapped around the side of the bottle, but I kind of avoid reading it. So I'm drinking this beer thinking, man, it tastes like Kohatu, what I remember when I was messing around with Kohatu a few years ago. Well, lo and behold, when I pull off this informational sheet that Chris included with the beer, he made this. It's 10 pounds Pilsner malt with a pound each of flaked oats and wheats, hopped entirely with Kohatu. I'm going to pat myself on the back for that. Have you ever used Kohatu, Brian?
I have never used Kohatu. You said Fruity Pebbles. I don't know how I feel about Fruity Pebbles in my Pilsner.
Oh, I like it. That is one of the things with New Zealand Pilsner that you have to keep in mind, right? Is that Pilsner is not necessarily known for having much of that fruit character. It's more known for the hop. Any hop character in a Pilsner is usually going to be kind of that spicy, maybe a little bit of floral that you get from
right.
noble hops. These New Zealand style Pilsners, though, are really emphasizing it's still subtle. It's not like they're, hop bombs, but you get a little bit more of that, down under hop character. I think it's quite pleasant. Definitely different than what you'd get, in Germany or something like that.
So up here, we don't really get a lot of, at least I haven't found any New Zealand style pilsners. Have you had many commercial examples? Can you recommend anything to keep an eye out for?
No, the only examples that I've had have come from homebrewers, with the exception of when I was in New Zealand, and they were everywhere. I mean, they were just calling it Pilsner there, but it's Pilsner hopped with, hops grown on that island, or and so but I'm not aware of any commercial examples yet. I do think that you're going to probably start to see more and more of them. It might eke into the commercial world, but I think you'll probably start seeing more because New Zealand hops are just great.
Agreed on that.
Yeah, especially for hoppy hazy IPAs. I'm sure you agree. There, but
they sound good. I actually have never. I don't think I've used any New Zealand hops in my New England IPAs.
You've never used like Nelson in any IPA, or?
No, I've never used Nelson.
Huh.
I'm a Citra fanboy, man.
I know you are.
But I am going to give them a try, though.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I would suggest that you do. Chris, thank you so much for sending in your beer. If you have a beer or any other fermented beverage that you want reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com. We'll get you all set up. All right, answers to questions when we return from this short break. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brülosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brau Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrau brewing system. Modeled after the brew in a bag method, the Unibrau uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrau is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrau, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. All right, let's jump right into this. First question comes from Niles Radel from Stowe, Massachusetts. Stowe, something like that. Niles says, as with almost everything homebrew hobby related, there seems to be a lot of opinions out there that can be hard to navigate. On the subject of Perlick versus, well, any other manufacturer, tap manufacturer, this seems to be all over the forums I've been reading. But on the last Brü A episode, I think he's referring to Brü A number 6, you talked about your love for Intertap faucets. On the My Gear section of brewlosophy.com, you list your Perlick 525 SS faucets, but no Intertap faucets listed on there. As I look to build out my freezer converted to a Keyser, I wondered what your experience with both of these manufacturers has been, and with the varying levels of materials used and price points. Thanks for all that you do, all that you and the brew crew do. Those were all umlauts.
That's a lot of umlauts.
Yeah, it's a lot of umlauts. Hey, so this is actually a really long story that I'm going to try to condense down. When I built my Keyser, I went with Perlick 525 SS faucets for all 6 of my taps that I had back then, because that's what I was reading where the quality was. Within about 4 years, 3 to 4 years or so, 5 of those 6 faucets began to leak. That kind of pissed me off, seeing as I spent a lot of money on those things. So anyways, I started kind of digging around online, and I discovered this really wonky, kind of cheap looking website for Ventmatic faucets. I ended up contacting the dude at Ventmatic, and we talked. He learned that I have this website and asked if he could send me some of his. He was kind of getting back up off the ground after some legal issues that he had. I'm not going to get too deep into that stuff. What ended up happening is he sent me out some faucets to review. I installed them. I absolutely loved them, and I said as much in the review article on brewlosophy.com for Ventmatic faucets. That review article ended up being very surprisingly popular, and I heard from a ton of people that day when we published that article who were placing their orders and wanting to replace their Perlix because they were having leaking issues and whatnot. Well, within about 2 months, I'd received another slew of emails from people saying, hey, they're sending me crap, faucets that are chipping, which means they're not stainless. They're chrome plated or whatever. That was not the promise. Some weird shit went down with it. I talked to Brad from Ventmatic. We had some issues and whatnot, but ultimately what ended up happening is that he found out about Intertap, who apparently had sort of taken the Ventmatic blueprints and was making a version in Australia that kind of was basically the same thing as Ventmatic. Brad legally went to the folks at Intertap to talk about it. They had some stuff going on, but they ended up kind of like high-fiving and coming together and working together to produce or at least to sell Intertap faucets that in my opinion are essentially work the same way as Ventmatic. Now, how did I get Intertap faucets on my Keyser? The folks from More Beer started selling Intertap faucets, and we're friendly, and they reached out and said, hey, listen, we know that Ventmatic isn't selling faucets anymore. We've got these Intertap faucets. Would you be willing to do a review of these so that the people who are shopping at More Beer have something they can refer to? I said, sure. They sent them out to me. I didn't do much research, threw them on my Keyser. They are awesome. I like them much better than Perlic, and I don't usually do like brand comparisons. I do prefer the Intertap faucets over Perlic. I've never had a single leak. Nothing like that. Now, I cannot say, I've heard some rumors that something like 30 to 50% of the Intertap faucets that are out there, regardless of where you're buying them from, whether that's eBay or Alibaba or More Beer or Great Fermentations, whatever, that they might be knockoffs that are being made in China. I don't know this. If that's the case, and I have China-made Intertaps on my Keyser, they work great. So that's my thoughts about that. I have not heard any complaints from people who bought Intertap faucets. Brian, I know that you've been messing around with different faucets recently.
I just got all Intertap on my kegerator as of last week. I went and got Ventmatics after speaking to you personally about how awesome they were, and got 3 of them, and those have been working just fine for me. I haven't had any chippings. They haven't leaked. I haven't had to do anything with them other than pull and drink. So after having the Ventmatics for a while, I decided to make a bigger kegerator. A buddy sent me a bunch of his old Perlic faucets, half of which worked, half of which didn't really work so well. So I used a couple of those. I used the Ventmatics. And then I was sent a bunch of UltraTap faucets, which were ultra sensitive, as it turns out, and pretty much just breathing the wrong direction made the handle come forward, and those started leaking. So I sent those back, and then switched out to Intertap. Now Intertap is becoming harder to find, and I've heard that there's been some supply issues. I think they are very popular. You do see them all over the place. I've purchased them from More Beer. I've purchased them from Right Brew. I've purchased, I think, all over the place. They all have the same little patent number, serial number on the sides, and they all seem to work the same so far. So, right now I've got 3 Ventmatics, I've got 8 Intertaps, and I've got the 3 working Perlics, and those are all set up on all the different kegerators I have. And
someone's got a problem.
They're working just fine.
Yeah.
So the Intertaps are definitely my favorite. I feel like they've got the best, it sounds like a car, but it's like they got the best responsiveness. They're very solid feeling, and they don't leak.
A little something about the UltraTap thing. My understanding, and this could be off. I don't want anybody to take my words and make them into truth when I'm just being kind of presumptive here. My understanding, though, is that the UltraTap, so Intertaps were originally created by this company called Keg King out of Australia. Good folks. They do all kinds of homebrewing stuff over in Australia, and people seem to really enjoy or like the products that they're putting out. My understanding was that they're the ones who kind of put the Intertap out there. When Brad from Ventmatic came over to talk to them about stuff, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think what it was is that they went in together to create an even better faucet, and that faucet was what they were calling the UltraTap. Now, as it goes with most things, new inventions, new products, they had some trials that they were sending out to people to test out. Brian, I'm pretty sure you got the trials. So when you sent them back, they learned of the issue that you were experiencing. And I think what they're doing now is working on that. So I'm not promising anything, but I do think what you may see is that Intertap, the reason Intertap's hard to find is because potentially this UltraTap, which is from the same company, is going to be coming in behind it and replacing it. It's going to have, basically be the best of both worlds, Ventmatic and Intertap. I don't know if you can find Intertap, buy them, because everybody I've talked to, whether they're made in China or America or Australia or wherever, everybody I know who is using them loves them. So at the very least, we can say that the world of beer faucets is way more dramatic than anyone probably would ever have imagined. And we spent more time on that question than I expected. So let's move on to the next question.
All right. Our next one comes in from Andy Jackson via email, originally from Ellensburg, Washington, although we're not sure where he is these days. He wants to know if anyone on the Brülosophy team conditions their grain before milling. If so, what is the reasoning behind the choice? Is it sparging related, tannin extraction related, both, or something else? And I'll just add that malt conditioning is the process of where you add a very small amount of water, kind of mist it and spritz it to your grain prior to milling. The idea being that you have softer, more resilient husks that don't get crushed necessarily as they go through your mill. The inside the starchy material gets crushed and the grain husks stay more intact.
Right. That's the reason that people gave before the whole low oxygen or low dissolved oxygen brewing approach, the Lodo thing. I know that they are big fans and proponents of conditioning grain for reasons of reducing oxidation, I guess, prior to even mashing in. I've never done it. I don't do it. I won't do it unless there's somebody out there who can show me evidence that actually has some positive perceptible impact. The reason I don't, for one, I use a brew in a bag method, and so I don't. It doesn't matter if I have husks or not. I can mash completely huskless grains and still lauter my wort and get it works fine. The other reason is I'm not doing a Lodo process necessarily, and finally my biggest concern would be my mill getting rusty from not getting dry. So
yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I think the only other thing that I've heard that you didn't touch on was the idea that people think that there's more astringency that would come from husk shredding, and other people will say that you can crush finer. But yeah, I'm using brew in a bag as well, so I set mine in about as tight as it'll go, and I've never noticed anything compared to any other way that I've milled or brewed that makes that gap distance taste any different, and which kind of makes me think that I can pulverize the husk, and it's probably isn't affecting my beer as much as people say. And it seems like just a big pain in the ass, and I don't want to throw water into my mill. That just sounds terrible.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and just the, I love brewing, and I love, the everything that comes along with it, I guess. But, kind of the bummer part for me is going out and prepping for it and weighing out all the grain. And it's just boring. And to have to wet down my grain and then make sure it's still kind of wet when I'm milling it. And it just adds more to it. And if there's no, quantifiable or noticeable even difference, then I'm just going to avoid doing it. So,
Captain, set the grain to moist, please. Yeah,
all right. The next question comes from Corey Leask from Winona, Minnesota. He says, "Hey guys, I've got a few questions for the next Brü A." Well, here you go, Corey. Do you have much experience with brew enzymes, specifically glucoamylase? Or is it glucomylase? We do have some experience because we've talked about it, Brian. I've been doing a lot of reading on Brut IPA, and it seems most are using enzyme in the fermenter. I work at a very large contract brewery, 2 1,000-barrel line brew houses, that uses enzyme in the mash as well as in the fermenter. Could the use of enzyme help with the efficiency loss of the short and shoddy mash? Thanks for all the great work you do. Couple of questions there, Brian. I think you are probably more equipped to answer the one about enzymes.
Yeah, I'll touch on what I know. So yeah, I've done a little bit with enzymes. I did that experiment comparing enzyme to no enzyme, and we talked about enzymes in the enzyme episode a lot. But so I'll just touch on I've used glucoamylase or amyloglucosidase and Sebamil, as well as I've used alpha galactosidase. Yeah. God damn it! Here we go again.
Yeah.
And invertase, which work together to break down those bonds. Beano won't really convert the mash. I've heard Amylo 300 can assist in the mash. Malcolm did the experiment where he got a lower gravity using the amylo in the fermenter than he did in the mash. So, there's a bunch of different products out there. I've heard the Amylo 300. I think BSG does Amylo 300.
I think so. Yeah.
Amylo 300. I really like the Sebamil. For whatever reason, it just when I used that, it brought my final gravity down to 0, even though I didn't get to try the beer. I did get that objective reading. So the only thing is, we talked about this in the enzyme episode as well, but if you're using those enzymes on the fermentation side, especially in a big brewery, you'd want to make sure that you wash all those out. Otherwise, they might be present for the next party that you have in your fermenter.
Right.
So as far as efficiency loss with short and shoddy, that's something I can only speculate to, but nothing that I've actually tried.
Yeah, I don't. So part of the short and shoddy thing is how simple can we make this thing? What I've been finding is that if I mash for 20 minutes, right, that's kind of what I started doing, then I'm in the range of about 58 to 60% brew house efficiency. If I bump that up to 25 minutes, which I've been doing lately, and I'm brewing another short and shoddy beer this weekend, in fact, at 25 minutes, I'm right around 65-ish% brew house efficiency, and I'm okay with that. That to me, people refer to that as being like really low. I think that the difference in grain when I'm getting 73% compared to 65% is less than a pound of base malt. It's really not a big deal. And it's working out. The beers have been tasting really good. So maybe adding enzyme would help with that or would improve that conversion efficiency. But that's not something I'm terribly concerned about. Once I get my hands on some of this enzyme, I do want to make a Brut IPA. So I will be getting some soon. I may try it out actually, just for fun with a short and shoddy batch. So,
yeah. But I highly recommend checking out the enzyme episode. We really did beat up. We really did beat up. I would say we did beat up a lot of terms actually, and talked about. I was trying to get myself out of that one, but we really we hammered a lot of stuff out and messed up a lot of terminology. So our next question comes from Sean Astill from Brisbane, Australia. He says, one vital part of experimental practice is a control sample. Have you ever incorporated this into an experiment, serving a certain number of participants 3 samples of the same beer to see if any differences are perceived? Is this something you've ever explored the idea of or done for the sake of your own interest? Or do you believe the triangle test is sufficient enough to eliminate the need for it altogether?
Okay, so we have done something like that. There's kind of a lot of questions wrapped up in this one. But so the first question is, basically, have we ever served participants 3 samples of the same beer? 100% yes. I served, I think it was 11 of my friends the same beer, and only one of them, I even kind of inserted an option for these beers all taste the same instead, which you're not supposed to do that on a triangle test, but only one out of these 10 or 11 friends of mine selected that. Everyone else thought one of them was different. So, that really speaks to this idea that when you expect a difference, you perceive a difference. And expectations, we know that expectation has an impact on perception. So I'm not sure now how we would integrate that into every triangle test. That would be a pain in the ass, and I'm not sure it would yield anything too meaningful. But I do think that it's important to I guess, experiment a little bit with bias. And we've got some fun plans for the future for some bias experiments that I think are going to be really not so much. They might be revealing for people who don't study bias, but as a psychologist, it's something that I focus on quite a bit. But they're going to be interesting nonetheless. And so keep your eyes peeled for that. Brian, have you ever done anything jerky like that to your friends?
Just for fun. Like I had a buddy that hated Monster and thought Red Bull was the best thing. So I served him 2 Monsters and asked him to identify which one was the Red Bull. And he said, this one's great. This one tastes like shit. So yeah, I do that to my wife sometimes. She hates it. She really hates it, especially when she likes the thing that's cheaper. So
yeah, our wives sound very similar.
I've learned to stop doing that. I occasionally ask people ask me all the time when we're doing these triangle tests, like, are you just messing with us? Are you just serving us 3 beers of the same thing? Because they can't identify the difference. And I think a lot of them are like, I don't know what to do. And I say, well, just put down the best answer.
Right.
Go with your gut.
Go with your well, and that's the thing or go with your tongue. Really, I mean,
right.
I've done the same thing with my wife. We really like flavored sparkling waters. It's kind of a trend right now, but I'm a big fan of it. Hey, you know what? It keeps me hydrated.
You would.
Well, it's not La Croix, so we get the cheap Kirkland Signature stuff. But
I thought you meant the alcoholic bubbling waters.
Well, she likes those. I'm not a fan of those things. But nonetheless, we were drinking some version of a flavored sparkling water that we hadn't had yet. And my wife made the comment, man, this one tastes so much better than the stuff that we were buying before. And they're both berry flavored. So I said, all right, I'm going to set you up with a triangle test. I went and grabbed some of our colored cups, and I did basically what we do with beer all the time. And she couldn't get it right. And of course, she's got that look of, are you kidding me? You're doing this to me now on her face. But that's kind of the thing, is that when we expect certain things, if I expect, for example, if I tell somebody, hey, here's a lager, and I'm gonna call my friend Jason Petros out by name on this one. I have a good feeling that if I serve him a well-made lager but fermented warm and told him it was fermented warm, he would taste esters, right? And that's not a bad thing. I think a lot of us do that. If I served him that same beer and it was good, I'm saying that it's a decently made lager and whatnot, but I serve it in a Pivo Pils bottle, right? My guess would be that there'd be at least the likelihood that somebody would call out esters would be lower, because you're expecting this high quality Firestone Walker produced Pilsner that everybody loves.
I love putting homebrew in a commercial bottle.
Oh, it's so funny.
The same style, capping it. I feel a little bad, but it's so fun. Because this is such and such and such and such, and be like, I made that last month.
Yeah. And didn't mean to throw Jason under the bus. Jason, we love you. It's just me and him have gone back and forth about this whole warm fermented Pilsner thing. He's got some pretty strong opinions about it. So, all right, next question comes from Garrett Smith from Rogerstone, Wales. We got a lot of international folks asking us questions on this show. Garrett says, I'm currently after the ability to brew a decent fruited beer, as currently I do not possess that ability in the slightest. What I would like to attempt is to add a fruit or other fermentable adjunct to an already fermented out beer and not have that adjunct ferment. In other words, on a homebrew scale, of course, how do I filter out or kill the yeast to stop them from fermenting? I'm aware of this principle on a commercial level exists, but I don't fancy heating bottles or freshly capped beer to high temperatures and can't see any other way to heat a full keg of beer. Filtration, I can't find any further information on either. It's like no one on a homebrew scale does this. Can you guys shed any light on a technique?
Yeah, there's a couple different techniques. I'm assuming that you're looking for a fruited beer that's probably not sour, because there's no mention of anything soured or Brett and funked sort of stuff. One simple option to do is if you're currently kegging your beer, is to add the fruit to the keg in the same way that you'd add dry hops to a keg and keep it cold. I've done that several times and never had the beer continue to ferment. Granted, I do finish my kegs off in a reasonable amount of time. If you let it sit for a long time and had some interesting bugs in there, something might happen, but the odds of that are very low. Another really popular technique that people use is the addition of what's known as potassium sorbate. And what this does is it essentially it makes it so that the wine yeast can't continue to ferment. They can't continue to reproduce. It sterilizes them. It puts this nice little coating on the cell wall such that multiplying is not possible for them. So if you do have some cells that are still alive at the end of fermentation, they won't really be able to regenerate themselves to carry out fermentation.
Right.
Other things people do is they'll use like sodium bisulfite or Camden tablets, thinking that they are able to kill off the yeast. But the amount that you would have to add to really kill all of the remaining yeast is very high, and even then it's, you might not get all of them, whereas the potassium sorbate goes through and sterilizes all of them. That's a very common thing in cider making as well, because usually cider will dry out a bunch, and you'll want to back sweeten with some sweet cider or some unfermented apple juice or something like that. I would recommend. It sounds like you're bottling, because when you say I don't fancy heating bottles, it would be much easier to just dose it with potassium sorbate than going through and heating all the bottles. So that's my recommendation.
That's what I would recommend as well. Though there are ways. He does say I can't see any other way to heat a full keg of beer. It's actually not that difficult. If most kegs will fit in even a the diameter is small enough to fit in even a 4-gallon kettle. I would think that you could heat, let's say, 3 gallons of water to boiling, and then plop your keg in there and let it sit for, your keg of beer in there and let it sit for a while, and then maybe gently heat the water up to stay above 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which I don't know what that is Celsius. But for pasteurization purposes, you could do that for 15 or 20 minutes. It's going to take a while because you got to heat this big volume of beer in the keg, but I would think that over time that would work. I'm not so sure of the flavor impact something like that would have, but if you don't want to go the chemical route, that is an option. If it's really hot outside where you live, you could probably, it gets to about 115 where I live in the summer. Just throw that keg outside, let it sit in the heat for a couple of days. Again, the chances are you're going to have some sort of flavor impact on that base beer, but then you can go back and add your fruit, and hopefully get what you want out of the fruit without it fermenting. So that's the best we got, I think, in terms of pasteurizing beer before adding additives.
Cool. Our next question comes from Dylan Austin. He says, "Hey guys, big fan of all that you do. I have a question regarding packaging. I purchased an SS Brewtech brew bucket shortly after reading your product review. So far, I love it, except I continue to have issues at the time of kegging. Any recommendations on dry hopping with this fermentation vessel?" He goes on to say that he did a 5-ounce dry hop split into 2 different charges, and essentially he struggled with the racking arm getting clogged, ended up using a sanitized coat hanger to free up the racking arm, and the disconnect on the liquid and I've ran into this. I ran into this problem too the first time I used mine.
Me too.
But the disconnect on the post clogged multiple times from what he assumes, and I'm guessing is correct, is hop debris. He performs a closed transfer under pressure, and he said there was still a half gallon to a gallon remaining in the bucket. He said at this point he's avoided bagging any of his hops out of the fear that the dry hop would be less efficient. Any tips would be greatly appreciated.
I had the same issue, Brian. It sounds like you did as well, on a batch of New England IPA that I made, and it is a pain in the ass. There's nothing fun about a clogged dip tube. I've resorted to doing a couple of things when I'm dry hopping. If I'm making a normal beer, the brew buckets are great. In fact, I don't even use the racking arms anymore because the yeast will settle down in the cone on the bottom of the brew bucket. But what I do nowadays is, first off, again, no racking arms, so I don't even use that. I dry hop in these stainless steel sleeves, and I have not noticed any negative impact from doing that. Now, we have a comparison experiment set up to test this out, to see the impact, because we've done experiments with bags, and for dry hopping, I forget the results. I do think that dry hopping, it didn't matter whether you dry hopped loose or in a bag. So our experiment would suggest that you can use your bag or some other filtration system for dry hopping, and it works fine. And if it saves you the hassle of not having to unclog your dip tube or your valve or the pop it on, or the disconnect on your keg, to me it's probably worth it. Just throw in another 5 or 6 grams of hops for your dry hop and call it good. That's kind of my take. Another thing that I have done when I have dry hopped loose is when I put the brew bucket in my fermentation chamber, I'll have the front of it resting on a thrice folded over towel, so that all of the yeast and hop debris falls kind of to the back of the cone in the bottom of the brew bucket. And that way, when I gently move it out to keg, I set it on a towel again, and it's sitting up so that, the dip tube or whatever it is you're using, whether you're using a tube or not, it basically remains clear.
Yeah, I actually thought you were going to say your solution was I just don't brew New England IPA anymore, which is.
But I still dry
option.
hop some beers. I don't brew New England IPA, but I still dry hop some beers. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I had the same problem. To get it unstuck, I just shot pressure back the other direction. If you're trying to get a completely closed transfer, then you do need to do it with the hose running from the outlet to the inlet of the keg. I have used a silicone tube, and I removed the keg post and then just put the tube over the threads, and it just went straight in, and then I quickly put the post back on. So you might be getting a little bit of oxygen in there, but it was a very efficient way. But lately when I do a hoppy beer and I'm doing it in a brew bucket, I use those canisters. I have found, and I'm sure that everybody's experienced this as well, is that the hops tend to expand like tenfold when they are soaking. So I use multiple canisters to ensure that I'm not getting a canister that just clogs up and there isn't any way that the liquid is making it to the center. I do want some of that floating around. The first time I did it, I used just one canister with like 3 or 4 ounces of dry hops, and the whole thing was like a plug when it came out. Yeah. So I use multiple canisters at this point, and I found that I haven't been having any hop debris going through the arm at all.
Now, just if you're wondering what we're talking about by these stainless steel canisters, you can find them on Amazon. They're like $11 a piece. They look like little T-balls that have been extended out to about 11 to 12 inches. They're about 2 to 3 inches in diameter. What I found with the ones that I've got is that I can squeeze I'd say a max of 3 ounces of hop pellets at least, and you can use them for whole cone hops as well. But you could squeeze about 3 ounces in there before you might want to start using another one. So if you're doing a 6 ounce dry hop or something, but use a couple of these things for that, just to make sure that all of those hops are touching that beer. Well, hopefully that answers your question, Dylan. We've still got a bunch of questions left. We're going to get to those after this word from our sponsors.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or Glycol Chiller at grainfather.com. Once again, that's grainfather.com.
So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brülosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/Brülosophy. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, The Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what The Hangover can do for you. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
All right, welcome back. We're going to continue on with our questions here. Our first one comes from James Morrison. He says, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about using refractometers versus hydrometers. I see that hydrometers tend to get used in all the experiments I've read so far, and I've never seen a refractometer used for final gravity readings. Do you just prefer hydrometers? Do you trust the correction equations? I've been using the refractometer FG calculator at Brewer's Friend to correct my final gravity readings since I don't actually own a hydrometer. I definitely prefer only having to use a few drops to take a reading, and I broke my fair share of hydrometers after or before buying my refractometer.
Good question, James. Yeah, I have nothing against refractometers or hydrometers. The reason that I prefer a hydrometer for FG measurements is because I also like to taste the beer, and it gives me an idea of how clear the beer has gotten, and which I use as a gauge for when to start cold crashing. So I've got my reasons. It's more pragmatic in nature, but those refractometer calculators, the one that I've always used was Sean Terrell's. You can find it at seanterrell.com, and they're spot on every time I've ever used it. Now I haven't used it with a beer that's over about 1066 OG, but every time I've compared my final gravity, I have one of those really sensitive final gravity hydrometers. Every comparison that I've ever made has been within 0.001 specific gravity point. So I would say that it's very accurate. For those who may not understand why James is asking this, refractometers are notorious for giving super high FG readings, and that's because alcohol has a different refraction than water, and so they're very inaccurate with alcohol. When you've got alcohol in solution, refractometer readings aren't accurate unless you plug it in to a calculator that accounts for the refraction of alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I don't use refractometers on either end. The only times that I actually end up using my refractometers is if I'm doing like a giant batch, if I'm going to be filling a barrel and doing 50 gallons of beer, and I want to see how the gravity is changing as I'm sparging. It allows me to do it on the fly because you don't have to do that temperature adjustment. Just put a couple drops on, wait a couple seconds, and let it go.
Right.
I like you. I like to taste it, so I do the visual. Just the hydrometer, it makes a nice visual also for the pictures for the articles. Yeah. I can't seem to get my phone to line up very well. And it's one less, I don't have to calibrate it. It's all just about simplicity. And since, I'm brewing 5-10 gallons and plus each time, I don't mind, the 4 or 5 ounces it takes for me to fill the graduated cylinder to get that reading. So yeah. It's just about simplicity for me.
Yeah. I honestly, my favorite thing about taking hydrometer readings for FG is tasting the beer. So that's a big thing. Now, the reason I use a refractometer for OG is almost 100. I don't care about wasting, 4 or 5 ounces of wort. My issue is that it can take forever to cool off, and then you have to plug in these, temperature corrections and yada, yada. I just plop a couple drops down on my refractometer, let it sit out for a minute and a half, and then take my reading. And so that's why I do that. Now, there are some people out there who will say that refractometers, I've never been able to get an accurate refractometer reading. Well, you got to make sure you're using your refractometer right, and then you have to make sure that it's calibrated. Almost every refractometer that I'm aware of, the $25 ones that most of us are using, come with a tiny little screwdriver, and that's so that you can calibrate your refractometer. Make sure that you're doing that. And then if it comes with both a Brix or a Plato and an SG scale, what you'll want to do, or what I've done to calibrate that, or to know which one of those is more accurate, is I will take the first time I use it, I'll take a standard hydrometer reading of OG for OG, and then make sure, check to see whether the Brix is more accurate with the hydrometer or whether the SG reading is. The refractometer that I'm using today, for example, is the SG markings are spot on with my hydrometer, whereas the Brix markings are just a tad off. So I use SG. Just some things to keep in mind, but I use both because for me, practically speaking, it's what works the best. So. All right. Next question comes from Andrew Gibson. He said, I've previously fermented the same wort with different yeasts and not really tasted significant differences. So if I wanted to ferment the same wort with 2 or 3 different yeasts to get completely different character, what would you recommend?
So I first interpreted this question as if I wanted to test a couple different yeasts on a batch of beer, what would I do? And my straight up answer was like, oh, you just split the batch. But I think after hearing you say this out loud, what he's trying to ask is what yeast he should use to get completely different character. So boy, there's like a million ways to answer this question. Yes. I guess it really depends what it is that you would like to try. I think that something I always find fun to do is to make a clean beer and a dirty beer, if you will. So, you can ferment something out with Brettanomyces. That would give you a completely different character. A Belgian yeast tends to lend a completely different character, in my opinion. If you're trying for the same beer, with the same base wort, something like 80% base malt, a little bit of wheat, a little bit of oats could lend itself to a nice saison. I've used a wort like that with a lager yeast and gotten a very nice lager style beer out of it. You could use that and put in a Belgian yeast and end up with something sort of like a triple. You're kind of adjusting your wort on each of these beers to be a little bit different than like what the standard wort is. But I think it'd be fairly similar and a good base wort just to try it out, and just kind of a neutral hopping. I wouldn't make a New England IPA and necessarily throw a Belgian yeast and a New England or a British yeast at it and an American yeast. I don't think that would get you the results that I'm guessing you're looking for here. But make a batch or 2 batches, one right after the other. You could do a double short and shoddy style, and then homogenize the wort, split it into 3 or 4 different fermenters, and then try a couple different styles there.
Yeah, I think you hit on this already, but the easy answer is pitch a saison strain, pitch a clean American strain. You're going to have 2 different beers. I can almost promise you that. One of the best saisons I ever had, my friend Wes made a hoppy mosaic saison. I have to imagine that wort fermented with something like Flagship or even pub ale, from Imperial, would have tasted equally as amazing, but completely different. And so you got to look at, if you're trying to, if you're fermenting something like Flagship, which is the Chico strain, next to something like, House, which is I believe that's their Whitbread dry strain, they're not going to be terribly different. Both of those yeast strains are kind of known for producing well attenuated, clean, crisp, dry beers. If you really want to split a batch of wort and have 2 totally different beers, pick yeast strains that are known for being way different. Brian, you mentioned Belgian strains. You could do, I love Gnome. It's not too phenolic, but it adds a lot of that kind of Belgian estery thing. Another thing you can do that I think is a lot of fun is split the wort post-boil while it's still warm. So figure out a way to split it. You could, rack it into your cooler mash tun or something like that, and then steep some roasted grains. You could do, or whatever character grains you want. You could do crystal malt. You could do a little bit of pale chocolate malt or something like that, and create a completely different beer. You are going to get the flavor from those already. Those malts don't need to be mashed for them to impart flavor. So that's another way for you to very easily create 2 different beers out of ultimately the same mash. So, and
furthermore, you could even take that 80% base malt, 20% oats and wheat, and pull off the first 5 gallons and then do a giant whirlpool with some Citra, and you end up with a New England IPA. So,
oh man, you are a Citra shill, Brian.
Yeah, I know. But that's something I've done on a larger scale is, do a giant boil, pull off some, steep some dark malts and pull off some more, cool it down, pitch, and then, that last bit that's still boiling, throw in a 5-minute addition, 1-minute addition, and boom, you've got the same grist, one big mash tun, and you end up with 3 or 4 different beers that come out totally different.
Oh yeah, I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, super fun. Our next question comes from Timothy Johnson. He says, I know you brew a lot of different styles for the experience, but what are some of your favorites, or have any of them made it into anyone's regular rotation? Conversely, how many of them end up being duds? Thanks for the great info you put out there. Keep being awesome.
I mean, so I used to get shit from my local friends, when Brülosophy was just kind of just getting off the ground, and their thing was, dude, you used to make all these really great beers and all that. And now you're just making these. It seems like every batch you make is some sort of a pale blonde ale or Pilsner or something like that. And it's true that, that we do, or I feel like we don't do it as much anymore, but we do try to design recipes that will allow the variable that we're testing, if there is a difference, to allow it to kind of shine through. That doesn't mean that the beers are bad, but we're definitely, it's not like the experiment beers would be competition beers, Now, that being said, I've scored really well with some of the experiment beers that I've made, particularly Vienna lagers, if I'm testing out something like fermentation temperature on a lager. I had a warm fermented Vienna lager that scored a 42 National Homebrew competition a couple years ago. So, take that for what you will. Any that have made it into my regular rotation, I'm too... I have too much fun trying new things for me to really think that a single style is something that I want to have on all the time. So the beers that I would say that I still enjoy drinking occasionally, but I don't always have on tap, would be like Tiny Bottom Pale Ale. I'm really excited to make Ray's Make America Amber Again recipe. I just got all of the ingredients that I need for that, so I'll be throwing that together soon. I don't know, Brian, maybe you have something different.
Not terribly. I mean, I kind of entered in with my love of the New England style, and I keep talking about that. Mine is slightly different than a lot of the commercial examples you see out there, and I'm kind of the only one in our crew that really seems to like this style. So I think part of it is because of I don't know, this is going to sound all high horsey, but like the way that I make it is different, and it doesn't end up being a turbid, muddy mess. And so I've gotten to refine that recipe to be what I want it to be, and it's a beer that I almost always have on, primarily because we always need New England experiments. But I would say the biggest thing for me is just in the discussions that we have as contributors with each other, trying to talk about different styles that would work for different experiments, or what, I don't want to say the best style, but a style that would work for the experiments. Those discussions get me looking into different styles that I hadn't heard about.
Sure.
I wasn't, before joining Brülosophy, I wasn't ever, I wasn't super into Czech Pilsner. And now it's something that I would say Pilsner Urquell is probably my desert island beer at this point.
It's so good.
It is. And so, I think it's just, it's kind of like, we have these constant emails where we're all throwing ideas out. It's like, well, what about this? What about this? And it's like, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that. And then you hear, I hear about Ray saying, all right, my Make America Amber Again is awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to try and brew that. I brewed that. It was good. You're always talking about how your neighbor or how Tim's got a Negro Modelo on draft all the time. So last time I was at a tequila bar, I ordered a Negro Modelo, and I was like, man, this is so good on draft.
So good, yeah.
So I brewed up a Negro Modelo style beer, and a lot of those cleaner beers that I hadn't been brewing as much ever, or I don't want to say cleaner, but more, just crisp, easy drinking beers are not something that I'd ever really pursued. I was always into the big Belgians, the barley wines, the imperial stouts,
right,
the sours, the fruited sour, all that stuff that I used to just go crazy about, but now it's more about, for me, perfecting drinkability, I guess.
Yeah.
In a beer that I can just crush all the time. So as for being duds, I can't say I've had anything that was terrible that was an experiment. I've had some things personally that have been terrible, but a lot of the sour stuff goes down the drain that doesn't taste phenomenal.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say it's just the the collaboration that we have in our as contributors that kind of fuels all these ideas, and then all the questions that we get and all the comments that we get from readers about, well, what do you think that how do you think this would work with this style, or how do you think this would work with this style? It's like, oh, maybe I will try it with this style.
Yeah.
So anyhow, long-winded answer, but yes, there are some that are in my rotation. I would say it's more pilsners, and as for duds, I can't say I've had anything that's just been downright disgusting yet.
Yeah, I will say this. I'm not a huge fan of the whole hazy New England IPA thing, but of those that I've had where I could drink multiple pints, yours and Malcolm's, and I know that, people are going to say, well, he's biased, but I feel like you guys have a grasp of the style differently than a lot of people. I think what makes we have taken this question from Timothy and completely turned it into our we're now on our what do they call it, podium or whatever. But I will say that I think the people who are pining for hazy, that's not where, and Ed Coffey would agree with us, right?
You're doing it wrong.
You're doing it wrong if your focus is on getting hazy beer. Like, that's not what it needs to be. It just needs to be have the characteristics of a New England IPA, which are subtly, in my opinion, different, noticeable, but still subtle in multiple areas. Different than like a West Coast or standard IPA, as I call them. You might have a little bit of haze, but that's because of your process. It's not because you're throwing freaking, flour at your beer or whatever. So, as for duds though, I do want to respond to that. Yeah, there are times where I'll make an experiment beer and I'm waiting to collect the data because it's boring. It's not necessarily that it's bad. I really truly feel that if you mind your cleanliness and your sanitation practices, that you're going to produce drinkable beer. We make so much beer that it's not worth it for me to keep a beer around that I just don't enjoy drinking. To me, that's a keg full of calories that I don't really need to ingest when I've got other calories that I can ingest and actually enjoy. I wouldn't call them duds. I would just say that they're not as enjoyable as other stuff I have around.
That's a better way to put it. Giveaway beers, because there are people out there that they do enjoy them. Everybody's tastes are different, as we know. And so it's not that it's like, here, I'm giving away the bad beer. It's just like, I don't need to drink 10 gallons of this beer that turned out this way with this hop that I'd never tried before. But somebody else is like, oh, this is phenomenal. It's like, all right, it's yours.
It's yours, dude. Yeah. Yeah. I give a lot of beer. I'd say I probably give over, 60% of my beer away, which I'm perfectly happy to do. So, all right, next question comes from Riley Higgins. He says, hey, Brülosophy crew, love the show, been listening for about a year and have learned a ton. Recently, I've been running into a problem that I can't find an answer for. In the past few months, I've brewed a blonde ale, pale ale, and IPA. Each one has come out lower in FG than Beersmith predicts. I cold crash and add gelatin, then rack to my keg. They taste great the first couple days after carbonation is complete, but around day 3, they develop a cloying sweetness. I've brewed an Irish red ale and a porter during the same time, and they were great start to finish. Seems like it's only happening in my pale beers. At first, I thought that maybe I cold crashed before fermentation was complete, but like I said, my FG is under 1010 on all 3 beers. My brewhouse efficiency isn't very good, 65%. Side note, I would say that that's actually pretty decent. So I wondered if maybe I'm getting short-chain sugars in my beer from the extra grain I use. I'm also not doing any water adjustments. I've got very tasty well water, but I've never had it tested. I hope you guys have an idea because I can't figure out where to begin. I should also mention that I have made several pale beers in the past without this problem. The only thing I've changed in my process is that I've begun cold crashing and using gelatin in the fermenter on all my beers, and I never had before.
So, yeah, there's a bunch of things going on here.
There's something main that I think you and I both have our heads on, though, right?
He's saying his FG is lower, but the beer is coming out sweeter.
So, but I think that cloying sweetness, that is something that I have become very confident about is an oxidation issue. And he says that this only started happening when he began cold crashing and using gelatin. Well, what happens when you cold crash and you use gelatin? If you're cold crashing in a fermenter, you're sucking air into your fermenter.
Right.
Unless you're cold crashing in some sort of a completely sealed fermentation vessel. When you add gelatin, you're opening the lid of your fermenter, you're adding gelatin in there. If you're brewing pale hoppy beers and you're getting a cloying sweetness after a week or so from packaging, I'm all but convinced at this point that it's because of the reaction of oxygen on the beer. That's my thinking, and I thought maybe you would be thinking the same. But
yeah, the low FG threw me. But yeah, I mean, if you're thinking like fruity pebbles sweetness or like that kind of like that berry flavor, sweetness. That's what I've noticed in like the New Englands that go bad. They have like it's like a gummy bear, fruity, pebbly sweetness, as opposed to like as to just like a general
Tropical
sweetness.
fruit type of thing.
And I know it sounds like I'm backpedaling, which might be slightly true, but when I think of a beer as being sweet, I think of sweetness and like the fruitiness as being different in my head. And I have had New England IPAs that don't necessarily taste sweeter, but they do have like a bright, like a cheap candy sort of sweetness flavor to them.
To me, it's like those lemon drop candies, that sugary, not the lemon part, but that sugary sweetness you get from a hard candy. And to me, it's very unpleasant. I hate it. Those have been my duds. If we're going to talk about a dud, have been New England IPAs that I've made, or even regular hoppy beers that have that oxidative character. And every time I pay attention to oxidation and I flush my keg with CO2 before filling it, which I do now for every hoppy beer, most beers, in fact, that I make. I've not had that issue. So I think you can get away with gelatin finding your beer, but I think what you need to do, this is Riley, right? Yeah. I think what Riley needs to do here is when he's cold crashing, he needs to figure out a way, whether that's using something like the Brülon lock, or putting some CO2 pressure, very small amount of CO2 pressure on your fermenter while you're doing your cold crashing to keep that oxygen out. I really think that's where a lot of this oxidation comes from. And then when you're packaging, make sure that you're racking that beer into a keg that's tough if you're bottling, but if you're kegging, make sure you purge that keg with CO2 before you fill it. I really do think that those two things will save a lot of headaches when it comes to oxidation of hoppy beers.
Yeah, I mean, another thing you can do is cold crash and add gelatin in your keg. So you can do your transfer ahead of time. If you don't really want, if you're feeling like you don't want to rig something up, and I don't cold crash in my fermenters that often anymore. It's just I find it easier just to rack to a keg, add the gelatin, go and use something like a clear beer system or a floating bob to pull the beer off the top, and it seems to work just fine.
Yeah.
And I don't know. For me, it's easier personally. But yeah, I mean, if it's a sweetness and a fruitiness combined, that does sound like an oxidation to me, because I haven't had my beers do that. Because I have perfect technique when it comes to this sort of thing. Duh.
Of course you do.
But I have tasted a lot. People that are dialing in their canning systems here locally have sent me some stuff, and I may try their things. And one can will be great, and the other one will be a slight purplish color, and you kind of get like, it just tastes like artificial fruitiness to me.
Yeah, it's gross. One thing that I've noticed about the beers that you make, though, Brian, is that occasionally you will have an FG that's quite a bit lower, because when we're publishing these articles, you guys all send me the Beersmith files, and I plug them in, and every once in a while you'll have an FG that's quite a bit lower than what Beersmith predicts. I'm not sure what that is. My assumption has been just that the malts that you're using, it's tough to say that. One lot of malt is exactly the same as the next one, even if it's from the same maltster. Just that something's different about that, and maybe that's what's accounting for it. Or it could possibly be, Riley, that your whatever thermometer you're using to measure your mash temperature is just not calibrated correctly. I don't necessarily.
It's completely possible that if you're mashing it at 150 degrees or 152 and you're letting it sit for an hour and you don't have it insulated and it's just sitting in a pot at room temperature in your garage, you're probably losing 4 or 5 degrees over the course of the hour.
But does that? But my understanding is that, and this gets into the denaturing of enzymes and all that stuff. Would that lead to a lower FG? I really don't know.
I don't. It's just speculation.
But good questions, anyways.
All right. Alistair Dinning sends in this question. For bittering hops, other than the alpha acid content, does the type of hop really matter? If the bittering hops are being boiled for 60 minutes, aren't we just boiling off all the aromatics and flavor elements of the hop?
That is the conventional wisdom, Alistair. Yes. I'm not so sure I buy it, because as we all know, hops come with a lot more than just isoalpha acids. And, they have different oils, and those oils do volatilize. Indeed. I still think, though, I've not done a test. I do believe we've done an experiment comparing something like Magnum versus Sots.
We did a cohumulone experiment. And it did come back as significant. We were expecting. I looked into this the other day because I knew it was something about cohumulone, and I went onto the site, and it was significant. We were expecting 12 tasters, and we got 12 tasters, or we would have needed 12 tasters, and we got 12 tasters. And I don't remember the preference split, but that one did come back as different, and that's where I feel I noticed the biggest difference in different types of bittering hops is just the bitterness of the beer. And I haven't really lined it up with, this is how Warrior tastes, this is how CTZ tastes, this is how Magnum is.
Yeah.
But I have had beers where it's just like, I just get this lingering harsh bitterness. And then other beers where they taste bitter, but I don't get that lingering harsh bitterness. And from what I've read, my best guess is it has something to do with that cohumulone content.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Dr. Shellhammer from Oregon State University, I believe he's done some research that kind of seems to suggest that maybe cohumulone doesn't matter, but in my experience, it absolutely does. Another experiment that we did, I just looked it up, actually. Contributor Ray, back in July of 2016, compared Magnum to Sots at bittering. So he used way more Sots hops than he did Magnum to achieve the same predicted IBU. And, that one came back not significant. So maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it just depends on the different types of hops that you're using. Magnum and Sots are kind of similar in terms of other characteristics. They're both German. They both kind of have noble characteristics. So, I think you can get away with bittering with a lot of different hops and be fine with it. But where I'm at with this question is, when I'm thinking about it, is I'm going to go with what we know produces a nice smooth bitterness, because I know that's what I appreciate. So it's something like Horizon or Magnum or Warrior, even Simcoe. Simcoe really does seem to impart a nice, smooth, low coho bitterness. I'm also going to reserve, my more expensive aroma style hops for later on in the boil. So that just seems what works out for me.
Yeah, and I think part of it is just trying to. I personally do think that there are some different flavors that do come through. I mean, I think if you were to do a 60-minute addition on a light pilsner using Citra, you might get something different than if you use Magnum. Personally, I think keeping the type of hops similar for your bittering addition that's similar to your aroma and flavor will help support that, and layer in some flavor. This is all just I'm just blowing smoke, but that's just kind of the way that I think of it. So if I'm doing I should say for almost all my beers I use Magnum, unless it's something that's super low IBU, and even then I might use a little bit of Magnum. I really like the clean neutral bitterness that I get from it.
Yeah.
But I've used Citra as a bittering hop for some beers that I wanted to pack as much punch in. It's probably a waste, but for like a New England IPA, I'm only using a quarter of an ounce as my bittering charge. So
yeah. I don't disagree. To me, it seems like if you're throwing in 2 ounces of a 2.8% alpha acid noble hop versus half of an ounce or less than that, of a high alpha, Magnum or something like that there's going to be some carryover, even if it's just from the chlorophyll and whatnot in the hops. But again, just opens up more avenues for experimentation for us. Thanks for the question, Alistair. That is all the time that we've got. Episode 80 is in the books, Brian. Hopefully our responses were at least enough to get people thinking. Remember that we do these Brü A shows every 10th episode. So if you've got something that you'd like to ask us, anything at all, honestly, feel free to email your questions to either feedback@brewlosophy.com or marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get it added to the list. With the number of questions I've been getting about Jersey and Tim lately, I've sort of been thinking about having them on for a Brü A. Maybe we'll make that our 100th episode. Brian, I know you're headed to Hawaii, man. You got any good plans while you're there?
There's a couple new breweries out there. I'm going to go to, it's spelled OLA, but I don't know what the pronunciation is. So they just opened up a couple weeks ago. Big Island Brew House is always a hit. Kona, love me some longboards. So I'm going to be drinking that on the beach. And I'm just going to enjoy my toes in the sand and not thinking about anything else.
Quite a bit different than the toes in the snow that you're getting in Anchorage right now. And I think I'm going to go grab myself a longboard. I actually have some out in my fridge right now. Hey, don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to keep up with our sciencey take on brewing and beer. The Brülosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.